Sorry, what? No, okay. I hear something, but it's not loud. We're gonna move on. Part 2, desirability. This is where things get trickier, and it's the most important part of framework. It's the impact section. Yet for some reason, it also a lot of times gets the least attention. Although ironically, I'm going to spend less time on it in this lecture because I talked too long in the beginning. The goal of this is broad. Why are debates with predictable and answerable affirmatives on potentially unethical subjects or topics better than debates with unpredictable and unanswerable AFs on potentially more ethical topics? The reason I add the ethical thing is it's incorrect to think about framework in a vacuum absent the AF's answers to it. If you were just going to go talk to your parents probably about like why people should follow the rules in debate, you're not going to meet a lot of resistance. They're going to be like, well, obviously the AF should be answerable and predictable. How else would you have a debate? And like, you're going to be like, exactly, that's what I thought. Thank you for agreeing with me. And like the reason why your parents are maybe not the best like deciders on whether or not AF should be predictable and answerable is because they're not super familiar with the AF answers, which are like, yes, but we have a theory of why the thing you want us to predictably defend and be answerable to is unethical. And therefore that complicates the logic a little bit and requires the AF or the neg take a slightly different approach. I noted in my notes that this is now the beginning of opinion time. Everything I've said up to this point in the lecture is the gospel truth, irrefutable, 100% correct all the time. Now, the things are no longer going to be that way. I'm going to say things that it's possible some people will disagree with. Maybe some judges will disagree with it. Maybe your coaches, or maybe you have like a really strongly held conviction that disputes what I'm going to say. That's fine. Framework debate is a giant, beautiful cornucopia of everyone's opinions. I think most of them are bad, but like, you know, that's part of the magic is you got to find your own opinion about this stuff. And so welcome to Miles's thoughts on framework, unsolicited advice, and general things I think. Okay, there are many avenues for proving that unanswerable and unpredictable AFs are bad. I've broken them into 3 rough categories, which you should think of as the 3 types of 1NC impacts: fairness, education, and skills. They go by like 58,000 different names. So building a little bit of a skill to categorize is important, especially if you're asked. If someone is like, the standard is resolutional, predictable cynicism, you need to know that that's basically just one of these 3 things and it's probably garbage. And so, you know, be good at breaking all the nonsense into words. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't give your standards fancy names. I like basically made all my money in debate, like every tournament, just renaming the framework standards. Like I'm a huge fan of that, but like know that it's a trick. Fairness. Preventing one side from getting an overwhelming advantage is the judge's primary concern. End the flowchart. You made debate bad, end flowchart. That's fairness. Education. We learn something from predictable and answerable affirmatives. We learn maybe about the topic, about the law, whatever. I'll explain all these more. This isn't the end of our discussion about these. Skills. We learn how to do something or how to think when we have predictable and answerable debates. That's the basic setup. So if I said something like framework, interpretation, blah, 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 interpretation, or standard. The standard is resolutional testing. The AF being accountable to negative scrutiny ensures that both sides get the skills of attacking arguments from their opponents and also defending their arguments from those opponents, which means that they're better able to advocate their position. I didn't use any of the language of fairness, education, skills. What am I probably saying?
Skills.
Skills. That's a skills argument, right? It operates very mechanically similar to all the skills template that I'm going to explain later. And so, you know, be ready to spot them. Okay. The hint is that you will see all 3 of these in a drill later today, and they may not have the name that I'm giving them. And so part of the drill that we're going to work on today is being able to identify and debate these concepts without having to use their, normal names. All 3 have pros and cons. all, are applicable and useful in various contexts. Some go better together than others. And so I don't really have, well, I do have an opinion on which is best, but like that has changed throughout time and it can change for you and it depends on context. And so you need to learn all three. Ask, take note on the cons because those are your 2 AC and 1 AR blocks. How convenient. Okay, fairness. Pros. If you win it, it's prior to app offense. If you win fairness outweighs, you probably won already. That's nice. It's content neutral. And of the three, it's the hardest for the app counterinterpretation to solve. I also think it's the hardest to impact turn, but that's a little bit tricky. It's really, well, yeah, it's the hardest to impact turn, but take that with a grain of salt or put an asterisk next to it. Cons. It's very circular in that winning that fairness is good because fairness is good is like kind of, yeah. There are decent reasons other impacts outweigh it. There's other, and it's the easiest to win impact defense too, because there's lots of reasons why debate is fair enough. You can always say there's plenty of negative arguments you can read against chaos, like Afro-pessimism and the CapK and whatever. And there's also no great turns case argument. Fairness turns the app is like not that good. And so you lose that fun trick. And a lot of framework debates are won on turns case. So you lose that. Remember when I said it's the easiest to impact or the hardest to impact turn? I still mean that, but the asterisk was the app doesn't really have to impact turn it because fairness is just like kind of so small as an impact and really unambitious with what it accomplishes in the debate that the app doesn't really need that tool. I'm not hating on it, by the way. I'm just trying to give an honest appraisal for the benefit of people who have to be app against fairness and framework stuff in general. Best way to execute fairness. Fairness is a prerequisite to voting, and holding that fairness doesn't matter or is bad on the terms of an unfair debate to begin with is illogical. A 20-minute 2&R could easily win fairness outweighs the app, and thus the judge should not consider reasons that fairness is bad from an app that was unfair to begin with. Fairness, people win with fairness with logic games and logic tricks. And this is, I think, the best one. That like, if the app is like, it's okay for us to be unfair because we've won that the world is racist. You could be like, you won the world is racist on unfair terms and thus can't apply it to our fairness argument. It's like a little bit of a mind puzzle. I think the negative is more right on that specific issue, but there's other ones the app can come back with. But thinking about, all of these tricks are really important. Fairness is one of those maybe brute force arguments in debate. I don't like to admit when arguments are brute force because I think it maybe teaches the wrong concept, so I don't apply it generally. But like if the block shoots out 9 different logic puzzles for the 1AR to reason through on why fairness outweighs, you're probably going to be doing pretty good. And so, that's helpful. Now, what's the caution for throwing out 9 logic puzzles? If the app can like figure one out and reverse the logic of it, you've made a fairness answer for yourself. And so you need to be careful. You should make arguments that are consistent and logically sound. And I think the best one is basically, if you come to the decision that fairness does not outweigh having come to that decision unfairly, that's illogical. And you should let the neg talk for 6 hours about why fairness outweighs. And if you're not going to let them do it, you've conceded that it does. Best app offense. Procedural fairness claims mask distribution and access inequities in debate, and the judge should actively consider those sources of structural unfairness before the procedural ones. This argument is like, okay, it's going to be really good on criminal justice. And the reason is that this is like a parallel theme in criminal justice, which is like, should we punish offenders for committing a crime without considering any mitigating circumstances for why they did it? Or should we just punish all crimes equally? Should we punish the person who steals because they need to feed their family the same as the person who steals on the stock market? Or are they both theft and therefore are equitably punishable by law? There's a lot of criminal justice literature that suggests that we should not punish crimes without considering why people commit them. And therefore, there's going to be a lot of good app evidence that's specific to this topic that's answering fairness in a vacuum. And therefore, you need to be prepared to deal with that as a uniquely potent threat this year. if you're going to be asked, this is going to be a really good argument for the next 12 months. And you should be really good at going for it. I've also realized that I'm going to definitely blow past the 12:30 deadline on this. I'll be in here until I'm done talking, but all of you are welcome to leave and you have the notes in 15 minutes. But I'll stay here and answer questions and talk about things until we're done. That's fairness. Maybe I won't. Education. The pros of education as a framework impact. Fairness questions first. Thoughts, issues, concerns about it.
I'm confused by what you mean about logic puzzles, Miles.
Fair enough. That's a little ambiguous. The reason why I say logic puzzles is because framework has this weird thing where it's like kind of a tautology. And by that, I mean framework or fairness kind of justifies itself. And it's like fairness is good because unfairness is bad. And therefore the premise presupposes the conclusion. The reason why you need logic tricks is you need to like build in reasons why this is not a tautology. You need to think about like, I don't know, if you need better justifications for fairness good than unfairness bad. And you can do that like with substantive things. You can be like, fairness is good because unfairness primes people to accept injustice across society. You can do that. It's been tried. It's like not the best argument because the app turns it really well, and that requires you to accept the app's impact, that unfairness in society is a thing that the judge should care about, and thus structural unfairness probably matters more. So you don't really want to prove that. You don't really want to go that avenue if you can avoid it. Like, for example, I coached a team this past year. We were planning for a framework debate, and we wanted to go for fairness, and I cut this like really weird card that we dropped in the 2NC. It was like, unfairness makes people just hate each other. And we're like, let's just like read this cool thing. It's like, if you make debate unfair, everyone's just going to hate each other. And the app was like, actually, that's good. That's solvency. And we were like, oh boy. So you maybe don't want to necessarily go down that route if you can avoid it. So instead, you need to just broaden the logical frame of why unfairness makes fairness good. Unfairness bad makes fairness good. And the best reason is like, I think the terms on which you decide fairness is good or fairness is bad must themselves have been fair. And if they're not, you can't come to that conclusion. There's other ways to like play with it. Like a judge voting for a team presupposes that both teams had an equitable chance of winning or they're not voting for a team. They're just selecting a side. There's like weird tricks like that. That one's not as good, but it's common. There's another one, which is we've all come to debate for some reason. It's impossible to decide what that reason is, especially within a 2-hour time frame, which means the only way to preserve a risk of us accessing the benefit of debate is to ensure that debate exists in the first place. Because fairness is necessary for debate to exist, any reason why it's good necessitates fairness. So like, again, like it's a lot of like weird kind of diagrammatic ways of thinking. If this is not really your forte, I offer 2 things of advice. One, you're going to have to get good at it anyway because counterclaim competition is like a giant bird's nest of weird logic tricks. And so it is good for you to generally think this way. And also, how many people are in here? Like 16, 18. So like if there's 18 of you in here, there's like 9 of you will be lawyers, and like those 9 will have to know this stuff anyway. So it's good for you to like, learn logic tricks in general. The second is that there's other ways to explain fairness that are not as weird and arcane, that are just like, simpler. That if it's unpredictable, you can't weigh your unpredictable impact turns against our argument that you should be predictable. That doesn't make sense. And then you can go for skills or education if you really don't want to debate about it. So, but if you like all this weird stuff and like maybe you're a math kid or something, like embrace it. Full on dive into all the weird reasons why voting for a team requires that vote to be fair. It's pretty fun. Okay. Well, we good on fairness now? Great. Education. Pros. Easiest to have an internal link to, because like debate, you learn a thing, you learn it. That's like education is like kind of a simple process. Harder for the ask to, no, that's not what I meant. Oh, yeah, okay. Harder for the app to impact turn or outweigh, because, you know, impact turning, like learning a thing is like kind of not the best. Impact turning believing something is easier. And so there's that angle against education, but, you know, those are a little bit different. And there's lots of good evidence supporting education. There's like a lot of good people that write like cards or debating about this thing, having a predictable back and forth over this thing makes you learn it better. Like the IR literature on that is like really good, for example, even though your topic's not about that. I'm sure criminal justice reform people, I'm sure, have a reason why adversarial discussions of topics is good. I can't imagine that they don't have an opinion on that. Cons to the education argument. AF also has education impacts, and therefore it's really easy for them to, like, you know, debate you on that register. So there's what I call less points of clash. Points of clash are important in K debates, and if you're going to come to my elective on answering the K tomorrow, you will hear me rant way more about this. But like points of clash ensure that you can have a debate where you solve different things, and that's really good for debating the K. Because a lot of K tricks revolve around minimizing points of clash. And so if you can multiply the ways that you disagree with the AF, you're going to generate more offense. We have another hour. Oh, wow. That really set me up for a disappointment there. Okay. The other cons, it's the easiest for the counterinterpretation to solve, because the counterinterpretation probably also involves education roughly parallel to the topic. It has the smallest real world impact because learning something does not necessarily make the world better in any significant way. Also, education can be solved by like going to school or getting an advanced degree. Like, it's not like all of us spend all of our non-debate time not being educated. In fact, that's basically what we spend all of our non-debate time doing. And therefore, like, also, the idea that like high school and college students are going to like learn from debate and then be professionals in the field they spent 1 year on is ridiculous. Like, actually to do anything with criminal justice reform education, you'd have to like get a law degree or like get a degree in political science, in which case you'd easily learn most of the things that debate would teach you. The neg might be like, oh, but you'll learn what to do if you get arrested. It's like you could learn that by Googling within like 5 minutes. And like, you know, you probably don't need a year of predictable debate. Like, can you imagine if someone was like, okay, so like I'm going to teach you what to do if a cop pulls you over. But in order for me to teach you what to do, you're going to have to spend like 2,000 hours getting the equivalent of a master's degree, traveling across the country, or like Zooming all summer in order for me to like teach you by example what you need to do via like complex metaphor and debating federal policy. I'd be like, I'm just going to go to jail. Like, that jail just sounds better than that. So like, education is probably, for a lot of like legal reasons, not the best thing for criminal justice reform, but it's a trap. Like, criminal justice reform education is going to be like really hot on this topic, and if you're AF, you can easily just kick that to the side, because like debaters aren't auto lawyers, especially maybe you want to think that. Best way to execute education, now that I've just thoroughly shown my opinion on it. Debate back and forth is key to a specific type of education. You need to beat the like going to school counter plan. And there's actually decent reasons why this is true. Like and again, IR literature is decent on the benefits of debate via versus like what's called didactic learning. Didactic learning is the like lecture model where like your teacher teaches you a thing and then you memorize it and then you're asked questions about it. That's like, there's good reasons why learning via debate specific model is valuable. Education, another argument is that education is key to AF solvency. Like, you need to learn a specific thing in order to do the AF. So there's that. And my favorite argument is that our education is likely to be wrong without the predictability and answerability that creates scrutiny in our education. And that if we have education where one side can be like, llamas are technically horses, I have 58 cards, what say you? and we do that like 1,000 times, a lot of debaters are going to like end up thinking that llamas are horses, and that would be a bummer because it would be wrong. And so maybe it's not, but like you see why answerability and predictability matter for education a little bit, and therefore that like the competitive incentive to research back and forth does in fact matter for learning a lot of complex ideas. So like, yes, what to do when you get pulled over is probably a thing Wikipedia solves, but that's like, that we shouldn't think about that as the extent of what debate education can provide us. It's also that, you know, we can learn what the various state penal codes are. We can learn what, you know, what states are actively advancing criminal justice reform versus ones that are not. We can learn, you know, what the status is of how FISA evidence can be used against everyday Americans or individuals in court cases. We can learn, you know, what amici curiae or, you know, all sorts of things are. And so, you know, what to do if you get handcuffed is not exactly the end all be all of what debate can teach you, especially if you think about it in terms of 8 years of debate or 4 years of debate, where, you know, you learn a whole bunch of general legal principles about advocacy and stuff like that. Best AF offense. Neg education is bad. This is what I said earlier, like winning that learning something is bad is generally not a winner, but learning that the neg education makes you subsequently believe something or think about the world in a specific way is good. Legal education trains you to think like a bureaucrat is a good argument because it's true. Like that's the thing I like generally believe. Like when you spend near a decade of your life reading a bunch of legal stuff for fun, you're going to generally have a pretty moderate take on whether the government should exist and like what criminal process should be, and, you know, how ethics and the rules of our society and fairness should be organized. And, you know, it's plausible that those things are bad if you're the AF, and having a decent way to impact turn those things or defend them is important. Education can be solved other places is another good AF argument. Only the AF can change debate. Like, debate has a flaw in it. It's racist for some reason. Learning about civil asset forfeiture will not change debate, and also probably won't change civil asset forfeiture. But like learning about racism in debate may actually change debate. AF outweighs. Decent argument. Critical education is key to neg education not being used badly. Another good prerequisite arg that like otherwise the neg's just going to learn about all the law and then just go become prosecutors. And you know they'll know a ton about the law. They'll be like really good law people, but they'll be prosecutors. And so, you know, AF is key to ethics or whatever. Yeah, okay. Questions about education?
The AF answer that's like legal education makes you think like a bureaucrat. Does that kind of set the AF up for another one of those like logic puzzle things where it's like maybe that's the reason why you should air AF on like, I don't know, K education is good because like topical debates has made everybody think like a bureaucrat, or does that not make any sense?
Yeah, it's possible. I wouldn't maybe characterize it as like a logic puzzle because I don't think it's one of those like, I don't know, it just feels a little different, but it is a good argument for sure. Just like the bureaucratic thinking has pervaded debate such that we don't really naturally consider alternative ways of thinking, and thus you should err extra on the side of the AF because you're more inclined to believe that a certain set of thinking is true. Love that. I think that's a really good AF framework staple. Anything else?
How would you impact out stuff like portable skills?
I haven't gotten to skills yet.
Oh.
Wait, so what is the difference between this and skills? Like the
We'll get there. No skills questions yet. Okay, education section is over. Now, there's technically 2 minutes left of the lecture. If you leave now, which you are allowed to do, but this is recorded, so you could theoretically watch it later, you will miss the section on skills, you'll miss the section on AF impact turns, and you'll miss the section on impact calculus. So do with it what you will. I will not be offended. Okay, skills. Pros of the skills argument. It's the easiest to outweigh the AF because skills have broad application across tons of things that we do every day, whereas individual AFs likely accomplish very little. And so skills have like kind of multiplied effects across the course of our lifetime. They are the most intrinsic to debate. Skills are the things that are most likely going to come from debate that don't come from other places. Like, you're not going to learn to be a really good cross-examiner or advocate from your English class. And therefore, debate is like pretty good at things like that. It's not as intrinsic to debate as fairness, because fairness is literally intrinsic to the game. And so if you just want an impact where they can't say something else solves it, fairness, I guess, is the best, but skills are pretty good too. And it's got the best turns case argument, better than education and better than fairness, because skills make your app, skills control whether or not your app works, is like a real just primo argument. Cons. It's possible, although not as easy as maybe education, to impact turn, because you can say that skills get used badly. And so we'll talk about that. Less good evidence. Evidence that define the skills that we get from debate is lacking. And so you have to be a little bit creative with how you explain skills in the absence of evidence. And it's trickier to prove a direct internal link between the skills and your impact, because what the skills things you do and how they get used in order to benefit society is a little bit more complex than I learned this thing, therefore I know it, which is simpler. Okay. Best way to execute a skills negative argument. Debate solves X skill, explain that thing. And it shouldn't just be debate. It should be predictability and answerability in debate are necessary to solve X skill. There's a few of them that I'm going to list here, but there's many more. Advocacy, scrutiny, and pay extra attention to scrutiny, dispute resolution, research, etc. Things that debate uniquely requires you to do that may have really good benefits outside of debate. This is different than education, because education is content-based. It says that there are things about the world, facts, history, ideas, readings that you should know. These are habits or ways of acting, ways of processing information, ways of communicating information that generally make you better at a thing. And therefore, it's slightly different. The reason why this is an important distinction is because when you're debating in general, and forget framework debating, when you're just having a debate, you're exercising two different things at once. In one case, you're exercising your ability to know things and to read evidence on specific content questions. They say the economy is high now, and you need to have a convincing reason the economy is low now, or you're going to lose that argument. And so there's a lot of content business going on in debate. At the same time, though, there's a lot of meta level skills that are happening. The line by line, your ability to spin things, your ability to look at two arguments that you have for yourself and quickly resolve which the better one to extend is, your ability to read, judge facial expressions and decide which one to extend based on how receptive they appear to an argument. The idea that, the ability to cross-examine someone effectively, regardless of the content, because you need to milk out some cool confession. The ability to construct an elaborate logic game in the form of impact calculus and turns case and uniqueness in order to, get a DA with a low impact into a DA with a high impact. These are all things you're doing in every debate that you may not even be super attentive to, regardless of the content. The thing that I will tell you for debate solves X skill is you should critically examine what benefits debate has given you in terms of skills. You should think about the things that you're able to do because of debate that people with similar intelligence to you may not be able to do. And it'll reveal a weird set of things. So like, for example, when you're writing a paper and let's say your teacher was like, I want you to write this paper on like the potential benefits of CO2 emissions on agriculture, right? Like, you can have a really smart classmate, but your paper is going to dunk on their paper. And the reason is that like you have access to maybe a little bit better repository of not only education and information, but you also know how to handle a project like that. Your really smart classmate who generally gets A's is going to be like, that is an untenable idea that I don't know what to deal with because like, that's just not true. You know search terms, you know files. And you know how to handle that. Let's say that I give you something you don't have a file on though. Let's say I was like, I want you to write a paper on why like Tibetan instability is good. Like, let's say that's your research assignment. You probably don't have a file on that. Maybe you do, in which case we should talk after. But like, you probably don't have a file on that. You know how to handle that. You know the search terms, you know the websites, you know exactly how to process that. And even better, you know how to sell that argument like it's just absolutely airtight true. That paper will actually convince like Muggle non-debate people that Tibetan instability is good. And the reason is that debaters have really effective communication skills. They like know how to advocate things they don't believe in. They know how to construct really seemingly airtight arguments, and they know where to put flaws in their argument such that people won't find them. That is like an example of some of the skills that debate provides you that typical education will not. And so if you think like this, like what superpowers has debate given me, you'll start to think about ways to construct skills arguments. Since most of you are still here, I'm a little bit less worried about time now, so I'm going to rant a little bit more. Another like common skill that debate gives you is like the ability to have arguments really calmly and resolve disputes. Who like generally finds themselves like maybe having an argument and it becomes really readily apparent that you are the only person who's not really pissed that the argument is happening. Like this is like a common thing you recognize, right? That's like not an accident. It's not that you're just like, all debaters just happen to be hard asses that like to argue with people. It's that we've been trained to really calmly navigate disputes. We're like really good at it. We can recognize and fully respect an opponent's argument, and we debate it on the merits of its argument. We don't use like ad hom nonsense like most normal people use when they debate each other. And therefore, like in that case, that's an example of a skill that debaters have, argument or dispute resolution. For what it's worth, this was my framework skills argument the whole last year. I think that argument's like really good. And we had an IR topic about cooperation, so it was really effective. You're lying. You do not have cards on that, Liam. Okay. The best way to execute. Debate solves X skills. We've talked about that. Find a reason why debate makes you like a more effective human. Advocacy, scrutiny, again, hint, hint, scrutiny, dispute resolution, research, etc., whatever. That is good for why external reason, but also turns and solves the case. Both of those are essential. External reason, your skill is good, and also turns and solves the case. If you're debating an app that's only advantages the economy, what DA do you really want to desperately avoid, basically at all costs?
One with an econ impact?
The like econ DA. Everyone in here knows this. If you debate only a hedge app, you're not going to bust out your readiness DA. That would be insane. You're like going to lose because the app has already had 8 minutes to explain why they solve that thing better, right? However, in framework debates, somehow, totally reasonable people that I think know this general idea will be like, our impact is clash. It turns the case, and also it turns the case, and it has an external impact because it turns the case. And they do the exact thing that they know is bad strategy because they're not thinking about it in this term. And so you have to have an external impact. The flip side of this is if you're debating an app with only an econ advantage and you have, let's say, a hedge DA, what do you really, really, really want to have?
Hedge turns the economy.
Yeah, you would like an econ impact because that's the app's only impact. And so if you can turn that, you can just shut that down real quick. And so, or DDEV, I guess, yeah, sure. So, you know, while you don't want to have a DA that has that is only impact is their impact, you also really want to have their impact as one of your impacts. And so you should think about framework impacts across the spectrum like that. You should be really specific about why your impact turns and solves their case. Why is X skill needed to solve the app? I'm going to talk about like the scrutiny skill for right now, like the ability to deduce what arguments are good and what arguments are bad. The reason it turns the case is obvious. It's more likely that the case is wrong if we don't adopt the skills of scrutiny. Or maybe the movement that the act propagates will be unsuccessful because its members will not scrutinize opposition movements, motives, and tactics, and will be less equipped to deal with like the harsh realities that the world is way more conservative than debate little groupthink. And therefore, like that scrutiny is important. There's also external reasons though why scrutiny is good. And it's that if people walk around with absolute acceptance of any idea that is thrown at them, society will like collapse. And if it does not collapse, it will devolve into like really weird, probably right-wing groupthink propaganda nonsense, because people will just accept uncritically the things that they are told. And to make society like better, less violent, less propagandistic, it's good for people to, to naturally be able to reason flaws in arguments that are presented to them. And therefore, scrutiny does have an external benefit of stopping like, mass authoritarian propaganda, even if on an individual scale. Okay. So skills, that's the way to execute. Best AF offense. This argument's good, and it's, the thing you got to be ready for. Skills get used for bad things without the addition of ethics. This argument does not get a lot of airtime by the AF for reasons I will never understand, but it is absolutely the best framework answer that there is in the world. That skills, when used by bad people, accomplish bad things. If you taught Dick Cheney how to really effectively use the skills of scrutiny and advocacy and persuasion, the world would not be better just because he could avoid propaganda. He's the guy making the propaganda. That would not be a good thing. And therefore, if you teach people completely uncritically, just like the way really, really good skills of being effective advocates, it's also just as likely you're going to make a bunch of like tea parties. And so the AF should say that without studying ethics, why we do things, whether things are right or wrong, we're not going to have a suddenly magical society where people use a bunch of content neutral skills correctly. We're just going to have a society where people are really good at stuff that has the same ethical problems it has now. And so that's a good argument. The neg answer. So could the AF, first of all. If you think Dick Cheney learning the skills of persuasion are bad, it's also maybe not good to give him the revolution playbook. And so maybe it's possible that propagating a lot of the AF education arguments are not good. Really weird but true example, the Israeli Defense Force, like the IDF, they're pretty bad. I don't want to offend anyone, but they're bad and you should believe they're bad. Like they basically are enforcing like a really colonial, horrible war of attrition against the Palestinians. You know what they read? Deleuze, like a lot. Like Deleuze's concept of deterritoriality, they took literally. They're like, we will deterritorialize Palestine. They like that. I'm not joking. Like they actually believe that. And it's very possible for ideas that seem like critical and progressive and revolutionary to just be easily co-opted by the right. And so, yeah, while it's true that the skills of persuasion and advocacy could be used by bad people, so could telling them everything you're going to do to resist what they do. Like, if you went up to all the prosecutors and were like, we have this like really sick plan to abolish the prisons, let me tell you about it, and then like you can write a case neg and we'll have a debate about it. They're going to be like, okay, fine. And then they're going to turn around and destroy you. And so, while it's possible that maybe making them better advocates is not great, it's also possible that telling them your exact idea for destroying the state may be not a good idea. Another is that debate is like the most leftist commune that exists on the planet. And therefore that like, while it's possible that the skills used in debate will be used by bad people, if there was a place where the skills were going to be used for good, it is almost certainly debate. And that like the odds that debate stuff gets used for bad are much lower than the odds that like anything else does. And so that's like a bit of impact defense. You could say the topical version and reading on the neg solve the ethics reasons why skills could be used for bad, but only predictability and answerability solve the skills themselves. And therefore the Goldilocks solution is to get your ethics education from K's on the neg and soft left app, but to get your skills from having to defend a plan. I think that's maybe the best argument. And my favorite is that evil does not need skills. Evil people are like stupid. And like, they don't necessarily need to be persuasive. They need familial wealth. Like the Trumps are a great example. They like run the country and are overt about their evil. They just have a lot of money. And so like, while it's maybe true that persuasive skills can make evil people slightly more persuasive, it's likely that those evil people are just going to keep doing their thing. Like Tommy Loren makes the worst arguments in the world. They're all completely logically inept. They're backed by no research. They don't withstand scrutiny. They're not built to understand her opponent's arguments. They're not researched. They're just nonsense. And she has a platform and like a weird dark web following, and therefore she can propagate them anyway. Like, the right does not need debate. They have propaganda and money and like a lot of white people. And so they don't really necessarily like need the thing debate gives you. But the thing they're the most vulnerable to like is effective argument and persuasion and mass campaigns to divest from their reasoning. And so it's likely that debate skills maybe hurt those people more than it helps them. You can reason that out in any given framework debate, but like, I wouldn't uncritically accept the proposition that skills are bad if, you know, like the idea, being persuasive is like the hidden fruit that we can't let fall into the right's hands, and we should just accept everyone in debate being unpersuasive on the risk that a bad person becomes persuasive. It's like, I don't know, it just seems like such an unambitious vision for society. We should just like all be bad at research, else the right might learn how to Google. That's like, okay. Other good AF answers: debate does not solve skills. Debate over the KAF solves other skills like critical research, performance, things like that. So there's other, there's other AF arguments as well. The performance one is pretty good. Okay, so back to the flowchart. If you're following my notes, we're back to the flowchart. Plan and the resolution solves predictability and answerability. That's topicality or interp debating. I've labeled it on the flowchart. Predictability and answerability solve fairness, education, or skills. That's internal link debating. We explained that earlier. Fairness, education, skills make society better in such a way that the AF ought be required to be topical. That's impact and impact calculus, which I already explained. Well, impact calculus I have not yet, but the impacting. Now we have a flowchart. We have a complete reason why the neg should win. You'd be surprised how many framework teams don't have a complete reason the neg should win. And now we have all the steps. It's complete. Questions about that. Skills, education, fairness.
Yeah, the right doesn't need debate stuff. Doesn't that kind of take out the argument that like they'll like learn the AF's ideas or whatever to use against them? Like they just won't take them?
Potentially, but there's a difference in what skills maybe the right and the left need. So like the right doesn't really need a lot of persuasive, argument skills because they have like mass media campaigns and money and the military. But what the left has is like way more people. It has like the ability to organize the masses and use like social media campaigns and organize people to divest from either the economy or the military or the criminal justice system or to take back police departments or what have you. And that does require the skills the debate gives you, because you don't have a financial advantage or an institutional advantage. You don't have like tanks and missiles and stuff. You need to convince people that your argument is worth joining. And I think that explaining the relative needs is important of the different sides.
If you're a neg and the AF goes for like survival skills, how do you make it more sort of offensive that your skills are more important? Well,
so a few things. One, you need to really dispute the idea of survival skills, because the skills the debate provides you are not survival skills. Survival skills are like making fires and stuff. What they have described as survival skill is really like, this skill makes it easier to cope with the world. That you can impact outweigh or turn, because your skills also make it easier to exist in the world. And, I would say that skills that help reduce structural inequality outweigh skills that make individuals more capable of surviving or existing in the world. You should read all those like K's of self-care there that are like the focus of our skill building and our advocacy should be structural and institutional reform, not individual well-being, because that kind of recreates the bootstrap narrative that the right wants you to believe. It fractures resistance into individual pieces. And also, I'll say as a side note, like saying survival skills is total blackmail. And like you should have an offensive argument just for that. But like the idea that the AF can claim that being AF is necessary for their survival is like clear blackmail that allows them to evade scrutiny. And like, you know, rhetorical tricks that are used to not have to be answerable should be examined very critically. And if the AF is like, trust me, I need this to survive, don't answer my AF, that becomes a template for a lot of potentially bad ideas that are justified in terms of survival that scrutiny would improve. Don't call everything blackmail though, be careful about that. Like, only do it if it's true. You have other good impacts. So only if they're like, don't trust me, I need this to survive, end of debate, you can call it blackmail. Anything short of that, I would just read other arguments. Great. Okay. We are basically done with all that stuff, but I want to talk about AF impact terms and some other stuff. General premise. If you've done everything else right, you already have an external impact and a turns case argument, and thus you can just weigh that against the AF impact term. Okay? You're not in a position where you're answering an impact term with nothing if you've done the whole flowchart. And thus, you can use impact calculus. Impact calculus is very similar to normal debating. Why does your impact matter more than theirs? But there's a few different standards that apply in framework debating. For example, if your thing affects the real world, like its advocacy skills for changing material stuff, and their thing affects debate, you can say that there's just way more vulnerable populations that could benefit from debate skill set than there are in debate. And thus that should outweigh us like on scope, right? Skills also might impact you long-term, whereas debate education only affects you short-term. So impact calculus, you know, that. Then you want to engage the specifics of the impact term with both defense and offense. Defense first. There's two steps. First step for defense, what are they impact turning? That sounds simple, but it's not. What specifically are they impact turning? Are they impact turning defending the government? Are they impact turning the government itself? Those are different. Defending those things are different. Are they impact turning fiat? That's different as well. Are they impact turning, you know, the framework itself? Are they impact turning the idea that you should tell them to be topical? All four of those have different answers and they work differently. And knowing exactly what is being impact turned allows you to do the rest of your work. Two, of defense. Say either no link. For example, state bad. You don't have to win that the state is good to win framework. You just have to win that a debate over the state is good, right? So no link. Or no impact. They say process counterplans bad. Be like, who cares? Like process counterplans are not the only thing that happen in debate. They're like about 1% of 2NRs are process counterplans, and they're not that bad because there's also other issues in the debate. So the only speech you're only giving about a process counterplan is the 2AR. So it's not a big deal. Offense. One, re-impact turn. The thing that they said is bad, say it's good if you have time. If they say the state's bad, no link. You don't have to think the state is good to have a debate over the state. Like anarchists also have debate over whether the state is good. They just don't think it's good, but they still have a debate. They like cite people who say it's good and then answer them. Similarly, Wilderson even is like, these people say the state is good. I say the state is bad. We will engage the arguments. They think that debate is good. They just don't think the conclusion, they disagree with the conclusion. Framework does not presuppose the conclusion. But you can also impact turn. State's good, politics DA is good, the process counterplan is good, legal research is good, whatever. A lot of times this can happen on case too. Two, AF links as well. When they say the criminalization DA to framework, framework was all fine and good, but then you said I had to read a plan and therefore you're now the police. You should be like, one, the AF counterinterpretation links to this because their counterinterpretation would be read as framework and thus would criminalize someone else. Does that make sense? So all those framework is bad impact turns all link to counterinterps. So good trick. Not deployed as much as I'd hope. Oh no, what happened? AF negargs, we should also impact turn that idea though. And you should be like the AF argument that like, so you should say that all negative arguments link to this because all negative arguments ask you to reject the AF and therefore criminalize the AF. But the idea that anything that criminalizes or problematizes the AF is bad is a new link to answerability, which we've already gotten good at impacting earlier, right? Because if it's true that the ask can just wish away any critique of itself as being criminalizing, it will avoid all scrutiny. It will become completely unanswerable, and it will harm maybe the skills, fairness, or education that we've talked about earlier, depending on the standard that you're advancing. So when they say criminalization DA, you should think, number one, you link because you have a counter interpretation. Number two, that becomes a template to avoid all scrutiny, new link. That's your block, by the way, to that DA. It goes by many names: the criminalization DA, the silencing DA, the policing DA, the exclusion DA, the access DA, the racial animus DA, whatever it's called. If its reading framework itself is bad, there's your block. Finally, to answer framework excludes blank education or skills, we have other things. We can read impact calculus and everything, but we also want a topical version and read it on the neg. These are usually defense, but they can be offensive, and I'll explain how in the last 5 minutes. Topical version of the ask. It's meant to solve, not the ask, so don't think that. It's meant to solve a debate over their literature base, not directly solve the ask, which means that you should say what the neg would read against the topical version and be like, that debate. So for example, topical version of the ask, set all sentences to 0. That solves because it allows a complete debate over whether or not the state should abolish or whether individuals should abolish, because the negative will read the abolition K. That debate allows us to precisely refine who should be the actor of abolition and solves the case. Do you see why it's good to say the debate over it solves, not the ask itself solves? Getting nods? Good. But you can also, and that's also read it on the neg, and be like, if that doesn't solve, you can read your abolition K on the negative against an ask, and that solves any of the reasons the topical version doesn't solve. That's a good even if. Love it. But you can also make it offense. Number one, the debate over the topical version. So there's two ways to make it offense. One, the debate over the topical version makes it more specific than the general platitudes of the 1AC, because the 1AC has to impact term like the whole government, the whole state, the whole criminal justice system. That means that their impact terms are going to be imprecise and generic. Whereas if they read it on the negative, they could read a K of a specific instance of government policy or revolution, which allows them to still say it's all bad, but also requires them articulated to a specific instance of policy, which means that the K will be more tailored, more specific, and more communicable. And therefore, it improves the K scholarship. Two, the second way to make topical version and read on the neg offense is by saying that if topical version and reading it on the neg are an imperfect solution to the ask, that's a good thing and a feature, not a bug, because learning to work within imperfect situations is a skill that we need. Getting exactly what you want, exactly when you want it, in front of a debate audience that's generally deferential to what you want is not a good skill for being a movement leader or an activist. You may have to compromise, work with people you disagree with, or advance a position that you don't entirely think is perfect. Topical version and reading it on the neg encourage you to learn those tactics, which are a net benefit to the topical version and reading it on the neg and are an additional offensive reason why the neg's framework argument is good. Those are two ways to make TVA offense, and that's my last block that I'm going to have you put into your notes, which is topical version is offense, which are those 2 points. Okay, that is the end, as you can see if you're following along with what everything I have to say. We can do a few questions, but also whatever. We can do a few questions, but also remember in half an hour you have Q&A, another hour-long Q&A. So, you know, we don't have to accomplish everything right now. Nothing? Okay, great. Well, I will encourage you all to meditate on all these ideas for the next half hour, and then I will maybe see some of you in lab, although I don't know what the breakout rooms are, so maybe I'll not. Thank you all.
Lab is an hour at 2.
Oh, great. Okay, you have a whole hour, even better. So marinate on these ideas for an hour. Thank you all for sticking with me for an extra half hour. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.